Believe me, back in the late 80s, Mike Tyson wasn't just a person. He was a force of nature. I'm talking about a storm that didn't just beat people, it broke them. Everyone thought the machine would run forever. But here's the deal. Storms don't stop because the wind gets tired. They stop when someone finally finds the switch. Today, we're counting down the 3 men who found that switch. Number 3 slowed the machine down. Number 2 changed the rhythm entirely. And number 1, well, some fans still argue about that night. It was the moment the storm finally ran out of road. Let's talk about how the lights started to flicker. Listen to understand the failure. You have to understand the system. Tyson's world was built on a clock. Every movement had a beat. He didn't just walk toward you, he hunted. Back then, the arena felt like it was shrinking for his opponents. You'd see these massive men, giants, really, and they looked like they were standing in a phone booth with a tiger. The crowd wouldn't even sit down. Why would they? Most of the time, the fight was over before the popcorn got cold. The air in the room would get heavy the second he stepped through the ropes. There was a way he made the ring feel like a trap. He used a front-hand fence to keep people guessing while he closed the gap. His head was always moving like a pendulum on a clock that refused to stop. That was his rhythm. Constant pressure, no room to breathe. Something changed in the room whenever he got close. When he arrived, it wasn't just about power, it was about the speed of the storm. He'd vanish for a second, and then reappear right in front of your chin. The other guy would try to step back, but there was nowhere to go. Tyson made them walk exactly where he wanted. He pushed them into a corner until the walls felt like they were closing in. You'd watch the opponent's face. First, it was focus. Then it was worry. Finally, it was just silence. You could feel the air leave the room when he landed that first big shot. The machine was too fast. The rhythm was too heavy. For a long time, nobody could break that cycle. It was a perfect system. He'd lock the entry, get inside, and turn the lights out. It felt like watching a car crash in slow motion every single time. But even the best engines have a weak spot. You just have to be brave enough to look for it while the building is shaking. The baseline was simple. If Mike started the storm, you weren't going home early. You were just going to sleep. But eventually, the aura started to flicker. The first crack was about to show up. The crowd went dead silent for the first time in years. And that brings us to our countdown. Look, if you were awake that morning in February 1990, you remember the feeling. It was early in the States, and the air felt strange. The fight was over in Tokyo, a place that felt a world away. Tyson walked into that ring, looking like the same storm we'd always seen. But something was off. The arena didn't have that usual roar. It was quiet, polite, almost cold. That was the first crack in the foundation. The machine was stepping into a room that didn't fear the thunder. Here's the thing about Mike's system. It relied on the other guy being small, not in size, but in spirit. But James Douglas brought something Mike hadn't seen in a long time. He brought the high fence. Every time Mike tried to get close, he ran into a front-hand fence that wouldn't budge. It wasn't just a hand in his face. It was a physical barrier that kept the storm at a distance. The machine had its first real problem. Mike had to walk longer than he ever had before. He was swinging at shadows because the high fence kept the distance exactly where Douglas wanted it. The crowd went dead silent as the rounds went on. Usually by the third round, the lights were already being turned out. But not this time. You could see it in Mike's body language. The head movement started to slow down. The pendulum was stopping. He wasn't sliding under the pressure anymore. He was just taking it. It was a physical failure. The engine was overheating because it couldn't find a way past that front-hand fence. Some fans say he wasn't focused. Maybe. But the reality is Douglas was standing the wrong way for Mike. He stayed tall. He didn't shrink. Every time Mike tried to pull the distance, Douglas pushed back. Something changed in the way Mike breathed. His shoulders looked heavy. The speed that made him a ghost was gone. He was just a man in a black trunk looking for a way inside a house where the doors were all locked. That was the first time we saw the king look tired. The rhythm changed from a fast-paced hunt to a slow, painful crawl. He was pushing into a corner, but he was the one getting trapped. You could feel the air leave the room with every minute that passed. The storm was losing its wind. Believe me, watching Mike's eyes in the middle of that fight was haunting. He looked confused. The system that had never failed him was suddenly broken. He kept hitting the high fence over and over. He couldn't lock the entry. Douglas kept pulling the distance, making Mike overextend until his feet were tangled. It was like watching a race car try to drive through deep mud. The power was there, but the wheels wouldn't turn. Too late. By the time the 10th round came, the physical error was total. The machine just stopped. When Mike hit the floor and reached for his mouthpiece, the world stopped spinning. He looked like a child looking for a toy in the dark. The invincible aura didn't just flicker, it went out. The crown hit the floor in a way we never thought we'd see. People back home were staring at their TV screens in total silence. Nobody spoke. We just watched the man who couldn't be touched try to find his balance. That wasn't just a loss. The machine had been dismantled piece by piece. But as bad as Tokyo was, it was only a physical breakdown. A mechanical failure. But the next man on the list, he didn't just break the machine. He got inside Mike's head and turned the lights out from the inside. If number 3 was a physical barrier, number 2 was a psychological trap. If number 3 was a physical wall, number 2 was a psychological trap. Number 2, the Iron Ghost. Listen, if you were in Las Vegas in November of '96, you could feel the electricity in the desert air. Everyone thought they knew how this story ended. They thought Evander was too old, too tired, and definitely too soft for the storm that was Mike Tyson. But here's the thing about storms. They rely on fear. They rely on the trees bending before the wind even hits them. And that night, for the first time in his life, Mike met a man who refused to bend. This was number 2. And it wasn't his body that failed him this time. It was his mind. The arena felt like a pressure cooker that night at the MGM Grand. When Mike walked out, he looked like the same monster we always loved. He was pacing, growling, looking like he wanted to eat the world. But then Evander walked in. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't looking at the floor. He looked Mike right in the eyes, like he was looking at an old friend he was about to move out of the way. The crowd went dead silent when they stood center ring. You could feel the air leave the room. The fear factor that Mike used to lock the entry was gone. The machine was facing the Iron Ghost, and the ghost wasn't scared of the dark. From the first second, the rhythm changed. Usually Mike pushes you into a corner and you stay there. But every time Mike pushed, the Iron Ghost pushed back harder. He stood the wrong way for Mike, leaning in, making the space tight and ugly. He used his head, his shoulders, and his chest to break Mike's beat. Mike would try to pull the distance to find his rhythm, but Evander would just grab him and hold him close. It was like trying to punch a shadow that kept turning into a brick wall. Believe me, you could see the confusion starting to grow in Mike's eyes by the 4th round. The second crack was widening. Here's the deal. Mike's entire system was built on intimidation. If you weren't afraid of him, half of his power vanished before he even threw a punch. The Iron Ghost just kept walking forward. He kept locking the entry, so Mike couldn't find the angles. Every time Mike landed a heavy shot, Evander just nodded and hit him back. The storm was hitting a mountain that didn't care about the wind. Something changed in Mike's body language. He stopped being the hunter. He started looking at the referee. He started looking for a way out of the rhythm he couldn't control. The room changed in the 6th round. The crowd realized the monster was human. Mike was getting pushed backward, and he didn't know how to fight moving his feet that way. His head movement stopped being a tool and became a frantic way to survive. The machine had its second major problem. It was a psychological collapse. When the bully realizes the other kid isn't going to cry, the bully usually panics, and Mike was panicking. The iron was starting to melt. Some fans won't agree with me. They'll say Mike was past his prime, or that he'd spent too much time away from the game. But look at the rhythm. It didn't just slow down, it shattered. He wasn't pulling the distance anymore. He was just being dragged into deep water. Every time they came together, the Iron Ghost won the struggle. Mike's face changed from anger to something that looked a lot like disbelief. He was trapped in a house where the ghost owned all the keys. By the time the 11th round came, the storm was just a breeze. Mike was leaning against the ropes, his legs looking like they were made of lead. When the final sequence happened, it wasn't a surprise. It was an ending that had been written in the 1st round. The crown hit the floor again, but this time, it felt permanent. The machine had been broken by someone who simply refused to believe the hype. Too late. The world realized that Mike could be bullied. The invincible aura wasn't just gone, it had been dismantled by a better mind. That was a psychological defeat that changed Mike forever. But as loud as that night was, it wasn't the biggest failure. There was one more name. One more man who didn't just break the machine or the mind. He broke the entire structure of how Mike Tyson existed in the ring. If the last one locked the door, this one turned off the lights and tore down the house. Gemini Danoi. If the last one locked the door, this one turned off the lights and tore down the house. Number 1. The broken structure. Listen, we have to talk about Memphis in 2002. It was June and the heat in Tennessee was thick enough to chew on. Everyone was there. The movie stars, the high rollers, the people who just wanted to say they saw the storm one last time. But if you were watching closely, the air in the arena felt different. It didn't feel like a fight. It felt like a funeral for an era. This is number 1, the final countdown. The moment where the very bones of the machine finally snapped. Here's the thing about the first two guys. Douglas showed us Mike could be tired. Evander showed us Mike could be bullied. But number 1, he showed us that the storm simply didn't have a ladder long enough to reach the roof. This was a structural failure. The big man standing across from Mike was a giant. He didn't just have longer arms, he had a different way of existing in the room. He was a skyscraper, and Mike was a wrecking ball that couldn't reach the first floor. The crowd went dead silent the moment they stood next to each other. You could feel the air leave the room. It wasn't just about weight or muscle. It was about the structure of the space between them. Mike's entire life was built on closing the gap. He was the master of locking the entry. But that night, the entry wasn't just locked. The bridge was gone. The machine had its final fatal problem. From the first second, the big man used a front-hand fence that felt like a telephone pole. Every time Mike tried to step in, that fence was there. It wasn't a punch, it was a wall. It was a structural barrier that Mike couldn't slide under or move around. He was pulling the distance, keeping Mike in a zone where the storm had no wind. Believe me, you could see the frustration in the way Mike moved his head. He was bobbing and weaving, but he was doing it 3 feet too far away. The rhythm was broken because the distance was impossible. Something changed in the way Mike looked by the third round. He looked like a man trying to swim against a tide that only moved one way. The big man was making him walk. Every time Mike tried to settle his feet, he was pushed back. Every time he tried to find an angle, the front-hand fence redirected him. It was a structural nightmare. The system was designed for a hunter, but the hunter was being kept in a cage made of distance. The room went cold as we realized the storm was trapped. Here's the deal. Mike's power comes from his legs, but that night his legs were spent just trying to get close enough to touch the big man's chest. By the time he got inside, he had nothing left to throw. The structural failure was total. It was like a car trying to drive up a mountain with no tires. You could feel the air leave the room every time Mike tried a desperate leap and fell short. He was standing the wrong way, reaching for things that weren't there. The machine was spinning its wheels in the sand. Some fans won't agree with me on this one. They'll say Mike was a shell of himself by 2002. They'll say he was just there for the paycheck. But look at the rhythm. Look at the way the space was managed. Even a young Mike would have struggled with that specific structure. The big man wasn't just better that night. He was a mathematical problem Mike couldn't solve. The reality is, the style that made Mike a king was built on a certain kind of space. When that space was taken away by someone that big and that smart, the structure collapsed. By the mid-rounds, the arena was quiet. It was a strange, heavy silence. We were watching a legend realize that his arms were too short to box with the world anymore. The big man just kept pulling the distance. He kept locking the entry with that stiff front hand. Mike's face was marked up not by big shots, but by the constant friction of trying to break through a wall that wouldn't move. The storm was officially out of road. When the end finally came in the 8th, it wasn't a shock. It was a relief. The big man landed a shot that put the storm on the floor, and this time the storm didn't try to get back up. He just sat there wiping blood from his face, looking at the floor. The crown didn't just hit the floor, it shattered into 1,000 pieces. The structure was gone. The house was down. Number one had turned off the lights for good. That night in Memphis wasn't just the end of a fight. It was the end of a way of life in boxing. The invincible machine was now just a memory. Too late. The era of the storm was over. And the silence in that pyramid was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Look, sitting here in this quiet corner watching the steam rise off my coffee, it's hard to explain to people how loud those years really were. Mike Tyson wasn't just a name on a poster. He was a period of history that felt like it would never end. But looking back now, the map of his decline is so clear. Every king eventually meets a problem that he can't solve with just power. It's the nature of the game. Believe me, the signs were all there if you knew where to look. Number 3 was the first real crack, that physical failure in Tokyo. Douglas was the wall the machine couldn't drive through. It was the night the engine finally overheated and stalled out in the cold. Then you have number 2. That was the psychological collapse. Evander was the iron ghost who took away the fear and locked the door from the inside. The bully met a man who didn't believe in monsters, and the rhythm shattered. And finally, number 1, the structural end. The big man in Memphis was a skyscraper that Mike's wrecking ball simply couldn't reach. The distance was a bridge that had been burned down, and the house fell. Physical, psychological, structural. The storm didn't just stop. It ran out of room to exist. I remember the feeling in the room that last night. The crowd went dead silent because we all felt the same thing at the exact same time. The engine was cold. There was no more thunder left in the clouds. Believe me, there will never be another storm like that. It's a strange thing, isn't it? Even though the lights went out years ago, we're still sitting here talking about the wind. The crown hit the floor, and honestly, nobody ever really picked it back up. That's just the reality of the game we love. The storm is gone, but the memory of the wind, that's going to be here as long as we're around to tell the story. He was the most dangerous man on the planet until the world figured out how to change the rhythm. And once that rhythm was gone, he was just a man. But what a man he was. The storm is over. Too late to bring it back now.